March 27, 1944, 1,500 hours, 27,000 feet over Brandenburg, Germany. First Lieutenant William R. Loy Jr. glanced down and watched his fuel needle bounce against the stop like it was trying to break free. His P-51 Mustang, serial number 44 to 13,986, had been running on vapor for the last 12 minutes, and every second the engine stayed alive felt borrowed. Below him, 16 B-17 Flying Fortresses from the 364th Bombardment Group limped westward from Berlin in a wounded, uneven string. Several trailed black smoke. Propellers on more than one ship looked like they were barely holding a rhythm. The clean gaps in the formation told the story without words. 6 bombers that had been there earlier were gone now, swallowed by flak bursts and fighter passes only minutes before. Loy should not have been alone. 40 minutes earlier his wingman, 2nd Lieutenant Frank W. Hill, had been forced to turn back when a drop tank refused to feed. Now the escort that was supposed to shepherd these crews home had become a single fighter with an empty stomach, guarding a bomber stream still hundreds of miles from the English Channel. The arithmetic was brutal. At his current burn rate, Loy had maybe 8 minutes of powered flight left. The fortresses needed another hour and 20 minutes before they would even smell safe airspace. And yet, the sky didn't care about math. It only cared about timing. Then he saw the threat climb up out of the southeast. 9 Focke-Wulf 190s rose toward the bombers, their radial engines leaving dark exhaust smears as their pilots shoved throttles forward into combat power. They belonged to Jagdgeschwader 26 out of Wunstorf, one of the Luftwaffe's hardest, most experienced units. In the lead position was Hauptmann Klaus Mittisch, credited with 68 victories. He'd already sent 2 B-17s down that morning. He wasn't here to posture. He was here to finish. What happened next would become one of those war moments that reads like a mistake in the records, an episode where the cold mathematics of attrition collided with a single pilot's refusal to let the numbers decide the outcome. But to understand the choice Loy made, you have to understand the world he was flying in. Early 1944 was governed by loss rates that bordered on insanity. 5 weeks before, during Big Week, American heavy bombers had been chewed up at a pace that should have ended the campaign. 226 heavy bombers lost in 6 days. 10 men per aircraft. The ledger was unforgiving. 2,260 airmen gone in less than a week. Colonel Curtis LeMay, commanding the 3rd Air Division, had studied the percentages like a man staring at a countdown clock. The average bomber loss rate sat around 6% per mission. A standard combat tour was 25 missions. Put those numbers together, and the probability turned savage. Only about 1 crew in 5 would finish their tour. 4 out of 5 crews would not. The Germans had turned bomber destruction into a method. Gallen's fighter force assessments emphasized concentrated, head-on attacks from high 12 o'clock, fast, direct, minimizing exposure to the bomber guns, maximizing lethality. And the aircraft climbing toward the fortresses now had been designed for exactly that job. The FW-190 Mittisch flew carried heavy cannon and machine guns capable of dumping a terrifying weight of metal into a target in seconds. It could open fire from farther out than the B-17 gunners could reliably answer. That range gap created a killing space in the sky, hundreds of yards where German pilots could strike first and peel away before defensive fire could bite back. The Americans had their own math, too. Tight combat boxes multiplied defensive guns into a single, interlocking wall. A properly packed group could throw out tens of thousands of rounds a minute, a screaming barrier the Germans had their own nickname for, something close to a meat grinder. But the best statistic of all wasn't a formation pattern. It was escort fighters. Operational research from the 8th Air Force had shown that fighter presence could slash bomber losses dramatically. Even when the escorts didn't shoot anyone down, their appearance alone often forced German pilots to change plans, drop external gear, or break off an attack run early. That was the context when Loy saw 9 fighters climbing for the wounded fortresses. The German approach was textbook. Come in from the bomber's low rear quarter, climb to meet altitude, level off at a distance, build speed, and then slash through the formation with cannon fire. It was a well-worn script designed to turn a damaged bomber stream into falling wreckage. Loy checked his own reality. His P-51 carried 6 50 caliber machine guns and enough ammunition for only seconds of sustained fire. And the fuel gauge, already a joke, was now an insult. A prolonged fight wasn't possible. A careful escort home was impossible. Conserving anything, fuel, ammo, altitude, was a luxury he no longer had. So Loy made a decision that only made sense if you accepted one truth. He could not win by fighting the enemy. He could only win by making them believe. He would have to convince 9 German pilots that the single Mustang in front of them was not starving and dying, but bold, fully capable, and ready to tear into anyone who tried the bombers. He pushed the throttle forward into war emergency power and rolled his Mustang over into a dive from 27,000 feet. The P-51 accelerated hard, the airframe tightening under speed as the laminar flow wings stayed smooth and steady where lesser designs would begin to wobble. The needle swept upward through the 400s. Lloyd didn't ease off. He couldn't. At 1,500 yards, he opened fire. All 6 guns spoke at once, their tracers streaking outward in bright, violent lines. At that range, the shots were too dispersed to be precision killing. That wasn't the point. The point was visibility, long bursts that looked expensive, tracer streams that screamed confidence. To the German pilots, it didn't look like a man who had to count seconds. It looked like a fighter with fuel to waste and ammunition to burn. And it worked. The tight German climb formation snapped apart. Aircraft broke left. Others rolled right. Middish and his nearest wingman yanked into a vertical maneuver, trying to reset and react to a threat that suddenly didn't fit the script. In that instant, the clean, coordinated attack on the bombers dissolved into scattered defensive responses, 9 fighters forced to treat 1 Mustang as if it were the beginning of something larger. That was exactly what Loy needed. But the price was immediate. As the Germans split and climbed, Loy felt his Mustang's engine begin to hesitate. Tiny, ugly surges that meant the fuel lines were nearly dry. The gauge was pinned at 0 now. Whatever power he still had wasn't coming from the tanks anymore. It was coming from the last scraps trapped in the system. He chose Middish's climbing group and pulled up after them, turning dive speed into altitude like a gambler pushing every chip onto the table. The Mustang's climb rate bled away in the thin air, and the aircraft began to feel heavy. But Loy kept his nose pointed at the Germans, kept the posture aggressive, kept the illusion alive. Because down below, 16 damaged fortresses were still flying west. And if those 9 Focke-Wulfs got even one clean, coordinated pass, the math would finish the story the way it finished most stories in 1944. Loy had only one job left: make the enemy hesitate, long enough for the bombers to live. The climb felt endless. Lieutenant Loy kept his Mustang's nose tilted upward, trading the last of his dive speed for altitude as the German fighters pulled ahead of him into thinner air. The P-51 shuddered slightly, controls growing softer with every 1,000 feet gained. His airspeed bled down toward the edge of safety, the needle sinking closer to stall speed than any pilot liked to see at altitude. Behind him, the bombers continued west, unaware that their escort was now surviving on illusion alone. German pilots had learned to probe American fighters with climbing maneuvers. Above 25,000 feet, many Allied aircraft lost their edge. A pilot who followed too eagerly into a vertical fight usually revealed weakness, fuel limits, overheating engines, lack of power. Middish expected that. He assumed any Mustang bold enough to climb after him had both fuel and confidence to spare. That assumption was Loy's greatest weapon. His engine began to cough. Not a violent failure, just a faint, uneven hesitation that sent a cold weight through his chest. Fuel starvation. The Merlin was running on whatever remained trapped in the lines. Seconds mattered now. Loy fired again, short, sharp bursts this time. Not enough to waste ammunition, just enough to maintain the lie. Tracers snapped upward toward the climbing Germans, a visual reminder that he was still dangerous. To the enemy, it looked like relentless pressure. To Loy, it was survival by theater. The climb slowed to a crawl. His airspeed hovered around 180 miles per hour, dangerously close to stall in the thin air. Any aggressive maneuver now could end everything. Still, he kept his nose pointed at the Germans, posture aggressive, body language unmistakable. Below them, tail gunners aboard the B-17s watched in disbelief. From the perspective of the bomber crews, it looked like a single Mustang had charged straight into an entire fighter unit and broken it apart. German aircraft scattered. Attack stalled. No cannon fire ripped through the formation. No bombers peeled away burning. Then, at nearly 29,500 feet, the Merlin went silent. The transition was immediate and terrifying. One moment, there was vibration and roar. The next, nothing but wind rushing over the canopy. No supercharger whine. No propeller bite. Just the sound of air tearing past aluminum. Loy was now flying a 7,000-pound glider deep over enemy territory. The Mustang dipped slightly as the propeller windmilled. Loy corrected gently, careful not to bleed speed. Panic would kill him faster than the Germans ever could. He trimmed for best glide, mind already calculating distance and time. At altitude, the Mustang could glide roughly 12 feet forward for every foot lost. In theory, he had range. In reality, he had enemies. Middish reached the top of his climb, rolled inverted, and began a diving turn back toward the American. He expected to see the Mustang braking defensively or falling away. Instead, he saw something that made no sense. The P-51 leveled out and angled back toward the bomber formation, apparently ignoring the German fighters completely. From the Luftwaffe's point of view, it looked like confidence bordering on arrogance. A pilot unconcerned with 9 enemy aircraft behind him didn't behave that way unless he had help coming or absolute faith in his machine. Loy was buying time. By gliding toward the bombers, he reinforced the illusion that his mission remained unchanged. He wasn't retreating. He wasn't fleeing. He was escorting. German radio chatter reflected the confusion. One pilot called out that the Americans showed no concern for their position. Another suggested reinforcements must be near. No one wanted to be the first to commit and discover too late that more Mustangs were waiting above. Loy descended through 25,000 feet, airspeed steady, movements calm. Every action was deliberate. He even weaved gently, small S-turns that escort fighters used to match bomber speed. Each turn cost altitude, but preserved the lie. To the bomber crews, it was comforting. To the Germans, it was unsettling. At 23,000 feet, Loy performed a maneuver that defied logic. He rolled his powerless Mustang into a smooth barrel roll, slow, controlled, almost casual. It was a terrible decision aerodynamically. It was a brilliant decision psychologically. No pilot without power performed aerobatics while outnumbered unless he knew something his enemy didn't. To Middish, the roll confirmed his fear. There had to be other American fighters nearby, waiting for the Germans to commit. Middish ordered his pilots to regroup and reassess. Those seconds mattered more than bullets. By the time the German formation stabilized again, Loy was lower, passing through 20,000 feet, but still in position, still acting like an escort, still dangerous enough to make attacking the bombers feel risky. Inside the Mustang, Loy's reality was collapsing. He was bleeding altitude he could never get back. His engine was dead. His ammunition was dwindling. And still he stayed. Because every moment the Germans hesitated was another mile the bombers put between themselves and destruction. And Loy was determined to give them every second he had left. The Mustang was sinking now, not falling, gliding, steady and controlled, but losing altitude with an inevitability that no amount of courage could stop. Every 1,000 feet gone narrowed Lieutenant Loy's options. At this height, the margin between survival and death was measured in seconds and judgment. Behind him, the bombers were finally pulling away. German fighters still hovered nearby, circling at a cautious distance. They made probing approaches, feints that tested reactions rather than committing to gunfire. Each time, Loy turned toward them with practiced aggression, nose lifting, wings steady, posture unmistakable. It worked. To the Germans, he still looked dangerous. To Loy, the cockpit was silent, cold, and unforgiving. Passing through 14,000 feet, he made another calculated move. With a sharp motion, he jettisoned his external fuel tank. Even empty, it tumbled earthward like a falling bomb, flashing in the sunlight as it spun. From above, it looked exactly like a pilot shedding weight to fight. German pilots noticed immediately. A man preparing to bail out didn't discard tanks. A man preparing to dogfight did. The illusion deepened. Below him, Germany spread out in quiet geometry, fields brown and dormant, villages stitched together by pale roads, church spires piercing the haze. He was far inside enemy territory now. Every foot lost brought capture closer. The bombers, meanwhile, tightened their formation. Defensive guns tracked outward, creating overlapping fields of fire. With the Mustangs still nearby, the Germans hesitated to close in. They had waited too long. At 10,000 feet, Loy fired again, short bursts, controlled, disciplined. Not to hit anything. Not at that range. The tracers arced uselessly through the sky, but their message was clear. I'm still here. I'm still fighting. Bomber gunners watched the display in awe. They saw conservation, not desperation. A fighter pilot carefully managing ammunition for the long escort home. When the Mustang's guns finally went silent, Loy was below 8,000 feet. His ammunition was gone. His airspeed hovered dangerously close to stall. The bombers were 2 miles ahead and moving steadily out of reach. The German fighters began to close. Then, unexpectedly, they turned away. Middish made the call. Attacking 16 B-17s now meant facing a fully formed combat box, dozens of heavy machine guns, and the possibility, still unproven, that American fighters might arrive at any moment. He had already lost time, fuel, and tactical momentum. Risking veteran pilots for uncertain gain no longer made sense. The attack was abandoned. Loy saw them bank east and felt a weight lift that nearly left him weak. He was alive, but stranded. At 5,000 feet, the truth could no longer be denied. He couldn't reach Switzerland. He couldn't reach England. The Mustang would not carry him anywhere else. He prepared to bail out. He trimmed the aircraft carefully, stabilized the glide, unbuckled his harness. At 2,500 feet, he rolled inverted and dropped free. The parachute snapped open cleanly at 2,000 feet, silk blossoming above him. As he drifted downward, Loy watched his Mustang continue on, engineless, obedient, still flying. It disappeared into a forest a few miles away, ending a glide that had stretched nearly 70 miles without power. He hit the ground alive. The escape that followed lasted only days. Resistance fighters helped him move north before betrayal ended his freedom. He would spend the rest of the war in captivity. But above Brandenburg, the outcome was already decided. All 16 bombers returned home. 160 airmen lived because a single pilot refused to leave them. Even when his fuel was gone, his engine dead, and his odds impossible. Later, German reports would cite the incident as proof that American pilots used deception tactics even when crippled. Directives were issued. Caution increased. Aggression faded. The truth was simpler. There had been no doctrine, no training, no backup. Only a man in a silent cockpit who understood that sometimes victory didn't come from firepower or fuel, but from the absolute refusal to give in. That afternoon, Lieutenant William Loy didn't win by fighting harder. He won by making 9 enemy pilots believe, just long enough, that he still could.